Welcome back, everyone, to week 13. Hopefully, by now, you've completed week 12's work, in which we looked at the Rwanda genocide and essentially looking at the different stages that countries go down, or the different steps they follow as they head towards genocide. So, you've done a bit of work around how we can possibly prevent these situations happening. What we're going to look at today is what do we do as a world, as a collection of different nations, the international community, what do we do to actually resolve these problems, these atrocities, and move forward. Because it's all very easy to talk about, well, it's okay, we can see genocide happening or we're going to stop it from happening. But often these events go without that stopping, without that intervention. So what we need to do is look to the international community to basically put measures in place to prevent these in future, but also deal with the people responsible. So what we're going to look at today is aptly titled Dealing with the Aftermath of Global Atrocities. We're going to be looking at regional tribunals and the ICC, which we've talked about briefly before. We're going to look at in much more detail this time. All right. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to give you a second to pause, read, and then come back and I'm going to go through it. Okay? Good. Thanks for coming back. So, like it says in that first one, we have to actually deal with these things when they happen. We can't just go, oh, that happened. I guess that's it. And no possible way that the country will ever face hardship again as a result of this. Think about it, the context of your country, which is sort of what you're looking up when you're doing your old presentation. The context of the country has led to this. So it means there was a schism between different cultural groups or racial groups or political or religious groups of some sort. Like in Rwanda, the Belgians completely swapped the power structure before they left after, stoking that fire of hatred between the two different cultural groups and social groups. So really, there's a whole bunch of ways it happens. The country itself does not just magically solve itself because of these genocides and these atrocities. So what happens is the international community and the country itself and neighboring countries set up localized tribunals. So these tribunals go through what happened, go through the evidence, and start trying to bring people in who were responsible or who were arrested and now face charges of participating in the genocide or the atrocity, setting it up, things, taking advantage of it, whatever it is. These tribunals look after them locally. So you may have heard of the Nuremberg trials. If you haven't, can you pause this video for a second, go to classwork. In the extra resources, I've posted a short video there. It'll walk you through what the Nuremberg trials were. Cool. All right, thanks for coming back again. So the Nurembergs were the first example of a localized tribunal. So these tribunals were put to basically prosecute any of the Nazis or Nazi sympathizers which participated in the Holocaust and all the awful atrocities that happened in Germany and surrounding countries during World War II and the lead up to World War II as well. We have the ICT, or the International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda, that happened as a result of the Rwanda genocide. You're going to be looking at that later in this week as part of your deep analysis work and your testing of your understanding, knowledge, and skills. You've also got the former Yugoslavia International Tribunal, and you've also got ones that deal with Cambodia and Sierra Leone. So we're not going to go into those at this point, but just know that these are a collection of procedures that follow under this idea of reaction. So there's reacting to an event. These are the reactions, but there are other ways that we can deal with it, and we'll see them in a second. Alrighty. So focusing on this idea of tribunals, there are advantages and disadvantages. Now, like it says here, there are advantages that the people who actually commit the crimes can face the people who they committed them against. So that's a really strong advantage. If an Australian commits an atrocity, it would make sense that the sovereignty of Australia takes hold and they should face the Australian people and our government and our law system and justice system. Linking to that second point there, it does lead to a greater sense of justice. If you feel that your country prosecuted those people and justice was undertaken by your country, by your laws, there's a lot more commitment to it and a lot more connection and ownership of that justice. However, on the flip side, it is costly and it can't go on forever. There has to be a point where it stops, and it may not be super effective if it doesn't get everybody or doesn't process everybody during that time period. It does require international support. It really can't just run by the country itself. It needs those other countries and the UN and other bodies to come in and support it as well. And time and space is limited as well. So it can only happen at a particular point in time in a particular time period, like looking at a particular time period. So if it went from 2030 to 2040, but you committed a 2029 that atrocity or the lead up to atrocity, you'd be pretty well off. You'd be fine as long as it was outside that year they're looking at. And they can't just go anything associated with it because, like with Rwanda genocide, you could trace it back all the way back to the original Belgians with colonization and setting up the hatred between the two groups. Like it goes back forever. So really, you have to specify a certain time, certain period, and within a certain location, which may limit the tribunal. Now, what we have is the ongoing operation of the Rwandan Yugoslavia rather tribunals. They were established in 2010, and they're still going at this point. Now, typically these tribunals have 4 years to get it done with biannual reviews. That is, they go in and double check what's going on, look at the situation, look at the tribunals twice a year, make sure everything's ticking over okay. So the Rwandan tribunal slash international intervention and support after the genocide is still ongoing today, and we'll be looking at that on Friday's work as well. Like it says there as well, set up to continue unfinished work of these tribunals. So there are extra programs which support the work of these tribunals. So a deficit of the tribunal system is countered by a positive of the international community and bodies supporting the work that's the framework that's laid at the beginning. All right. So because things happen after the fact, they are reactionary. We don't actually have a lot of deterrence to stopping it. So if a cultural group really hates another cultural group and they're willing to commit genocide, like there's very little we can do to deter this from happening. What we need to do, and you would have seen this in my previous video around the steps of genocide or the stages of genocide, there needs to be the prevention of the pot bubbling over, so to speak. So what we need to be looking at is education. We need to be talking to people, and we need to basically be supporting countries before it gets to genocide. The world was also seen to be doing very little. It happened, the atrocity was awful. The countries come in afterward to support those nations, but the atrocities already happened. So the International Criminal Court, we're going to move on to this now. Now, this is a bigger potato, so to speak. So regional tribunals react to certain atrocities and certain things that happen, certain localized crime. We're looking at the ICC now as an international body. It's an arm of the UN. We've talked about this so far. It was established by the Rome Statute, and it's part of what it actually does. And the statute was set up in 1998, but it did take 4 years for it to actually be finalized and implemented. So it was a big deal. We really needed to make sure it was correct and right. The ICC is essentially a permanent international court that's set up to deal with international crime. So it can look at genocides, it can look at crimes against humanity, and it could originally also look at war crimes. Now, crimes of aggression in terms of territorial aggression were added from 2017. So from the last few years, countries can be brought there if they breached other countries' sovereignty illegally, which is most of it, right? All right, let's have a look at crimes against humanity. So it's not just a popular card game. It is actually something exceptionally serious. It's anything that is any of these acts that are widespread or systemic, and they're directed against a civilian population. So killing other people in war, other soldiers, that's not a crime against humanity. They've sort of participated willingly in the situation. War crimes have their own section, which can be things like use of banned weapons in combat under the Geneva Convention. But again, that's under war crimes, not crimes against humanity. So let's have a look at them. So things like mass murder, mass extermination of a particular people, deporting or transferring people, torture, persecution, apartheid, enforced disappearance, all of these awful things here, you can read them below, they're considered to be crimes against humanity. So if certain groups or people commit widespread or systemic attacks under these ideas, they can be brought to the ICC. Now, like I said before, war crimes fall under the Geneva Convention, which are considered to be the rules of war. So these are rules of war which have evolved over the last few hundred years, if not thousands of years. They are things like you don't kill civilians unnecessarily, torture, right? So you can't experiment on people. We've seen a lot of that reported through World War One and World War Two, particularly World War Two. We're looking at experimenting on people. It's a no-no. We also have things like uh, depriving a POW, that is a prisoner of war, of rightful trial and fair trial as well. So often, what if you don't know what POWs are? They're prisoners that you keep, and then you swap. Forces will swap POWs for their own people, who the other team or the other side have POWs. So it's also like taking hostages as well. Some things that are added on the war crimes are use of weapons like poison gases, anything that you can't see, like a mine, landmines. They're considered to be breaching the Geneva Convention because it's not acceptable in combat. Taking your enemy as a prisoner of war, sure, you're meant to treat them with respect, treat them as you treat your own soldiers, even though they are prisoners. Taking your POWs and abusing them and torturing them, that's against the Geneva Convention. So if the state does not take action, you can go to the International Criminal Court and request that they do. It can take action if referred by a state, and the Security Council of the UN can actually refer cases to it as well. So really what needs to happen is the nation needs to be a member state, that is what we call a state party. Otherwise, the court would have no jurisdiction unless the Security Council said, hey, you need to check this out. Because the Security Council, that's the big boys club, so to speak. So they get to recommend things even if the nation state or the state party isn't actually a member of the UN. So nations who aren't a part of the court are the US and China as well. So there are criticisms of the International Criminal Court. So on the surface, it looks like it's really good, helps solve all those big problems internationally, but not everyone's a member of it. It has a real focus on the African continent because we've seen a lot of atrocities happen there. But as a result, it does good work, but it isn't tooled for the rest of the world because we haven't seen that atrocity and breach of these war crimes many places across the globe that have been referred to the ICC. In a lot of ways, it's also politically influenced as well. And it took until 2011 to actually stop its first case as well, like to close it and finish it. So it took a long time. If you remember, it took 2002 it opened. So it took them 9 years to finish something. Now, it's not quick, and it costs a lot of money as well. And it does struggle to bring offenders to justice as well, because you need damning evidence, you need a lot of force, you need a lot of ammunition to be able to pin these charges on people and ensure that those offenders are brought to justice. All right. So what we're going to be looking at in the work for the rest of this lesson, because this is a short lecture, you're going to be looking at some work around the idea of the International Criminal Court, a small case study on what it's done, and then you'll be looking at the Rwandan genocide efforts in the ICC, as well as after the fact, with the UN supporting Rwanda and the countries who sent aid and the ongoing efforts to restore balance between the Hutu and the Tutsi people and to ensure the stability of one Rwanda and not split into social, cultural, political, religious groups, etc., etc. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Just a short taste tester. A lot of the work you'll be doing on the Thursday, Friday in particular, we'll be looking at this critical analysis of what the ICC does. And the question this week will revolve around the ICC and its place and constant clash with sovereignty. So until week 14, see you later.